clients love the J word. Just take her physical performance from take 2, and just take her face from take 4, and put that on there, and maybe just take her hair from take 8, and put them all together, and you go, wow, that sounds really easy, because you kept saying just. I had an actor on set once who didn't want to get their proper shirt from the car trunk in the driveway, so they're like, can't you just like replace it in post? It's like, no, that's hard. Being visual effects supervisor, usually the most important part is knowing what the tools are at your disposal and how hard they are to implement. A lot of times, if I'm on set being a visual effects supervisor, I'm just like standing against like the back wall, waiting to see if anything will become a problem for me in post. And a lot of times, no. As long as there's something I can track on there, I've got what I need, and the DP will kind of look over, and I'll just be like, we're good. But yeah, so let's say you have a shot like this where Nathan Vegdahl is standing on a stool, and they say, just paint out the stool so that it looks like he's floating. And you go, okay, that's easy. I'll just use the clone tool here and paint this out, and it looks like he's floating. Except the camera is moving. And so suddenly this is a whole entire other situation, because if you just have some static gravel here, sitting in the middle of the shot, that looks really dumb. What you have to do is recreate the environment behind the stool, matching up with the ground, perfectly, with the perspective and all of that. And that's significantly more complicated. And I used to be really afraid of shots like that. I was afraid of 3D camera moves and all that. So I'm really glad that that's changed over the past few years, because it has made so many more things possible. So let's dive into it. Since the camera's moving, you know the drill at this point. We're going to go over into visual effects, motion tracking. That pulls up the motion tracking interface. I'm going to quickly open this up and check these settings. I think we can change this to 23.98, although it doesn't really matter because we're using an image sequence. All right, let's load in our footage. And since it is an image sequence, I'm going to select the first frame and say open clip. And here we go, but if we hit play, it kind of stutters. So I'm going to click Set Scene Frames, which will make the sequence the same length as the clip, and Prefetch, which will load it into RAM. That can sometimes take a minute, but in this case, it was very quick. All right, let's get some stuff set up here. First, you can see the camera moves fairly linear, just left to right. I'm going to start in the middle of the shot and track in either direction, because it's more likely that any tracking points visible there will be visible both at the beginning and the end. For motion model, I'm going to change it to perspective. Location means it's just looking for this one pixel pattern, and it's trying to track it around. And for like points on this ivy wall, that would totally work, because it's just the same pattern, moving around. But for the gravel on the ground, which is what I really want to get a good track on, since the camera's moving over it, it's kind of rotating and skewing a bit. And perspective takes care of that really good. So I'm going to check normalize. And in this case, I'm going to increase the pattern size a bit. The pattern size, that's the size of the pixel pattern that it's looking for, and the search size, because we're dealing with 4K footage, and so 75 pixels compared to 4,000 pixels means that if the camera's moving like at all, will drift, outside of that search area. Unfortunately, because it's searching that way, I think in every direction, the higher that number gets, that increases exponentially the area it's searching, which also increases exponentially the amount of time the track takes. But we've got time. The other thing I'm going to do is change the correlation to be something lower, so maybe not that low, so it'll keep tracking even if it's not quite so sure of its results. All right, well now we can go straight into detect features. It's going to slap some dots up here. And actually, let's track a little bit larger here. Maybe like 30, 32. That didn't change much. Okay, we got this. I'm going to lower the threshold to like 0.2, get a nice distribution going. Maybe even like 0.15 here. Yeah. And, accidentally clicked off of it. And I'm going to change the distance to be something more like 70. Is that going to be crazy? I'm going to delete the ones off of him. We're also going to be filtering the results of all of this later, and so this isn't totally important, but yeah, now that I've got this, I'm going to click this button here to track backwards. And you can see as it goes that all of these little squares are actually skewing a little bit with the perspective as we shift, like they're no longer perfect squares. And that means it's working. We're definitely getting some weirdos going on up here as they run into him. He's kind of acting like a big windshield wiper going through all the track points. We could pause it and detect more features to fill in these areas that now don't have any dots here, but I think I'm going to try to do the entire thing with just... Caitlin has arrived with donuts! Oh! She has threw the donuts upon me. I have been,
trying to do this all the way.
Yeah, this is like my 20th take, and I'm actually...
Getting there.
This is the one.
Okay.
This is gonna be the one.
I'll see you in a bit.
Okay.
I love you.
Okay, so now I'm gonna go back into the middle here and track in the other direction. And I kept running into this thing where it would reach a point and suddenly all the tracking points would disappear all at once. Yeah, like this, where they would just start to, well, actually this is still going. I'm not sure why that is, why suddenly sometimes things get really unstable. And this actually doesn't represent it. It was like 95% of all the trackers suddenly just disappeared. And it's not like the camera jerked or anything, you know, that would throw it off. I'm not sure why. But all right, now we've got a bunch of data here. Let's let's add some more points down here because we're going to turn all of these points into a point cloud, which we can use to reconstruct the environment a little bit. And so I want some more data from here. So I'm going to hold down D, and I'm going to draw in the area where I want some more points. Yeah, and I guess I should grab... Here, let's see. I wonder if it can be this precise. I want to get some up here too. Okay. Go to Detect Features, and I'm going to say Inside Annotated Area. Good, okay, and I'm going to turn the distance way down to like 20, and let's, maybe more like 35. And I'm going to click just this button here. We only need a few frames for it to get a sense of the parallax for them to be included in the solution. We're not really trying to solve the camera based off of these. I just want those dots included so that we have them in the resulting point cloud. Okay, so hit A to grab everything. Look at this mess. Let's clean it up a little bit. Under cleanup here, I'm going to start with filter tracks. I wish it were on top, so you were kind of working from the top down. But yeah, we'll start with filter tracks. And here, I'll open up this right here. If I change this to a really high number, it only will select a few here, and ideally these are the ones that are going a little bit crazy. They're the ones that don't really match the movement of everything else. And if I delete those, you can see this gets a lot cleaner, which means we might be ready to try to do our solution. First thing, keyframe A and keyframe B. This is very, very important. This is you helping out the tracker. What the tracker's doing is it's looking at the movement of all of these 2D points, and it's trying to figure out, okay, is there a movement from a camera that would justify the parallax of all these points moving like this? And if it's and it does this by specifically comparing two frames, at least I think initially. And if those two frames are from the exact same perspective, the point clouds are exactly the same, so it doesn't have anything to work with. And so I'm gonna say, look at frame 10. And then look at frame like 105. If you ever try to get a solution and it takes forever to solve, or the solution error is really, really high, usually tweaking the keyframes will fix that. Ha! Okay, and I'm actually coming back from the future here because I accidentally set this to 100, and so I was getting these very, very large error numbers, and I was like, what's going on? So I'm gonna reset that to 10, and I think I'll have some better luck here. Okay. Check all these boxes. I think there's one I don't have to check. Like for distortion, this calculates if I'm trying to fix the distortion in compositing, which I'm not really going to try to do. That would be useful. Actually, I probably should. But solve camera motion. Let's see what we get. And see, it's very fast. We're at a solve error of 3.19. Okay, that's good. And what that means is like. It's looked at all of these 2D points moving around, and it's saying, okay, is there a camera movement that could justify the parallax of all these points moving relative to each other? And it's come up with one, and 3.19 pixels is the average distance any given point is from the solution it came up with, from where it thinks that point should be. So what I'm going to do is go down to Clean Tracks here, and select, set the reprojection error to 4, and this selects any point that is more than 4 pixels away from where the solution thinks it should be. And you might be thinking like, Ian, aren't you getting rid of like useful tracking data? And one, I already have a bunch of points. We only need 8 good points for a good track. And two, what I'm actually probably doing is selecting points that didn't track all that well to begin with. So if I delete those and resolve the camera motion, we should get a lower, whoa, 411 pixels? What? That's ridiculous. Okay, let's try cleaning, it more. Let's see, clean, reprojection error of 2. Whoa, okay, yeah, no, of course. I mean, that makes sense because this is the error. Okay, so this is actually weird because we have a lot of clean data, and as I mentioned, I've actually tracked this shot like 15 times at this point, and it always tracks really easily, so this is a little weird. I'm going to try putting in some info by hand. I'm going to go down to track, open up camera, and because I know the data that I was working with, I know I have a 35mm sensor, and the lens was 35mm. Let's see if putting that in by hand helps fix some things. Yes, okay, now we're down to half a pixel. So that's weird. Just for some reason, I think because the camera was fairly long and there wasn't a lot of parallax data, it's all kind of like just flat and in the distance. We weren't getting a great result in this one, but this is definitely something more along the lines of what we'd want. So let's run with it. I'm glad I knew the focal length. Okay, so there's a couple things we can do now. We want to bring it all over into the viewport, and I used to click set as background and set up a tracking scene, but that just did so much that I don't actually think I want to do that right now. So I'm gonna hop into layout. All of our tracking stuff is gone, but the data is still there. So let's start using it. First, I'm gonna go into the camera view, go into the camera settings, and check background image, and just load in our video. In fact, instead of loading in the image sequence, which is this big 4K JPEG sequence, which would play back pretty slow in the viewport, I'm going to load in this lower res version, and that way we can get a really good playback if we actually give it enough frames. And to give the camera the right motion, under the constraint tab, we just load in the camera solver, and there we go. Everything's nice and locked. Under the overlays tab here, we can check motion tracking, and I'm going to turn down the size of all these axes, but these are all of our tracking points. So let's do this, and I'm going to just try to line it up with the ground here. Yeah, that's gonna be good. I don't really care about the scale, keeping anything to scale in this case, but yeah, that's what we want. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to set up a new piece of ground that'll perfectly cover the stool. So Shift A, mesh plane here. Let's scale this up, and I want it to barely be intersecting all of these points. Yeah. In fact, I might scale it this way. Is this covering the stool really well? Yeah, totally. Tab in edit mode, right click, and I'm gonna subdivide a few times here, maybe even once more. It doesn't hurt. And if I turn on proportional editing, I can drag different points down and just try to massage it so that it's really intersecting the middle of the points. I want it right in the middle of these crosshairs here to make sure that I'm matching up the actual ground. One thing you can do, actually, let me jump back from in the tracking window. Under geometry, you can click this button, 3D markers to mesh. And if we go back into layout, we have a new object here. Let me hide the camera. And look at this. This is a new object. If we tab into edit mode, we just have all of these vertexes. And if we select them, boop, 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 and click F, we can like rebuild the geometry. In this case, that's a little ridiculous, but if you were doing something a little bit cleaner with more controlled tracking points, like architecture or something like that, you could recreate the environment out of those tracking points and then like reproject the video back onto that geometry and effectively have a perfect recreation of the thing you're tracking. But in this case, we're just trying to make ground, so I'm not going to worry about that. The fact that we're on lumpy ground is actually going to be the hardest part of this shot. If I had just done it on like a flatter surface, because where the patch and the ground, if they don't line up perfectly, you're gonna see some slippage, which is no good at all. Okay, this is looking pretty good. So our goal is to just be able to take some of this gravel here and paint a new patch right over the stool. And that's fairly easy with texture painting. So I'm gonna go from object mode down to texture paint here. If I go over here, this opens the tool panel, and we don't have a material or anything on this plane yet. So I'm gonna check plus, create a base color, and this gives us some options. We're just creating a new surface for us to paint onto here. In fact, we'll call this the patch. Yeah. I'm gonna make sure it has enough resolution, doesn't hurt anything. This is the only thing in the scene, so we can push it a little bit. And we absolutely want to use an alpha channel. We want it transparent except where we've painted. But by default, if we click on color, you can see the alpha is set to like 1 to 100%. I'm gonna drag that to 0 so it's see-through instead. And if we click OK, it's gone. But look at this, we can paint on it, and it's there on the ground, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so how do we paint gravel? We will go down here to texture. We're painting a texture, and this bit gets a little bit funky just because of the Blender interface, but let's create a new texture here and call it like gravel. Yeah, and we can't do anything here actually. We have to jump over into the texture panel down here. You can see we're still in gravel though, and I'm gonna load in a single frame from this animation. Ideally one that has, you know, a lot of foreground stuff here and without too much motion blur. Because if we paint, you know, with motion blur, then that gravel will always be blurry. I'm going to grab this frame right here. Cool. All right, now back into the texture painting tools. And if I just start painting, it's doing this weird, you know, tiled dark version of that. So we're going to change that from tiled to stencil. And now we have this little thing, and wherever we put it, woo, it will paint that onto the ground. Look at that. This is such a cool tool. I avoided it for so long. But right now it imports it as a square. So I'm going to check image aspect. It's a little confusing because we already have navigation tools. So they had to invent some new tools for moving this around. So you right click and drag it and shift right click to scale it. And if you hold down control, you can rotate it a little bit. Here, let's get a better view. Yeah, right here. I want to keep the stool at about the same height, the stool and this background aligned, because I want the gravel to be the right size. If I move it, you know, like this, then I'll be painting a bunch of small gravel on the close bit, or vice versa. If I paint this, I'll have the foreground gravel, you know, really big in the background, so this keeps that lined up. I'll just offset it a tad, and let's see. I'm gonna turn the radius down just a bit and paint over the stool right here. And right now it looks like it has really harsh edges. That's just the way it's displaying. It actually has a little bit of a feathered edge, which means I'm gonna fill it in even more than usual to make sure that there aren't any like fuzzy unpainted areas in there. Cool, all right, now I'm gonna go over here and just keep painting that in. Cover that stool up. Filling that all in. And let's see, is there anything at the end? Yeah, it pokes out a little bit there at the end too. So let's grab some of that. And oh, looks like I may have painted some of the stool onto here, so let's cover that up. And I think this is a good patch. Yeah, it looks like it's sticking to the ground nice and good. Okay, so how do we make this actually look good? Let's go back into object mode, and I'm gonna slide open a shader editor. So when we clicked plus in the texture paint tools to create that new material, they automatically linked it up over here. This is the patch, and they plugged it into a principled BSDF. We don't want to use a principled BSDF because it's doing a whole bunch of stuff, and we just want straight pixel value of the texture we created. So I'm going to change this to emission, because if something's emitting with a value of 1, it just shows basically the default JPEG values of your, you know, the texture that you loaded in there. If we go into rendered mode, what does it look like? Yes. Okay, so it's got black around it for 2 reasons. The first one is because we haven't actually put any transparency into the material. The other one is because when you're in Eevee, if you want something to be transparent, the material has to have the blend mode set to alpha blend, which now is doing some silly things, but we won't worry about that. Okay, so add a transparent shader over here. I'm gonna mix them together, and I'm gonna use that alpha channel from the texture to control the mix factor here. So now we have this really ugly shape. It took me forever. This derailed me one time, and I was like, why is this? You have to uncheck show back face, and now it's looking kind of weird. Here, let's try going down under film and checking transparent. And yeah, there we go. Okay, this is looking pretty good. There's a couple reasons it's still not matching up very well. First, let's go into the camera settings and turn up the opacity, and also go down to color management and change it from filmic to standard, and that'll get rid of it doing any sort of transform. And right now it works really good. You'll notice there's a haze around here, and that's because the video layer that we're seeing it's an overlay, and so it's doing some sort of weird thing with the alpha channel. This is just where it's fuzzy. If I were to load the footage actually into the viewport, so it wasn't just an overlay, it would work. In fact, let me show you that really quick. I'm gonna load in a plane in the background here, make it nice and big, filling up the whole thing. In fact, let's parent it to the camera. I'm gonna give it that video texture here. Make a new material, emission. This isn't how we're actually gonna be compositing it. I just want to show you really quick. Make the color and image texture. Load in our. I guess here I'll just do the video. It's upside down. I'm gonna change the vector to window, which just means the coordinates it's using are the actual bounds of the camera view. If I change it from repeat to clip, it it gets very weird and it shows us that we don't have enough frames. Here, auto refresh, and yeah, now we can see it. And look, that looks really good. I'm gonna uncheck viewport denoising to keep everything a little bit more crisp. Yeah, I'm happy with that. That said, that's not actually how we're gonna do it, because I wanna composite this on. So I'm gonna delete this and go back into just having this background video here. We'll get into the compositing later. Okay, so how do we put his feet back in there? Well, the first thing we can do is clean up this patch a little bit, because I think it's a little bigger than it needs to be. So I'm gonna get rid of everything. Like, his foot never overlaps the stool, so I'm gonna get rid of everything under his foot. So I'm jumping back into texture paint, and I'm gonna change the brush settings from mix to erase alpha, and then I can just erase this little bit here. He said erroneously. Oh, okay. It's because we still have stencil, and it only lets you paint places where there's a stencil. And so I'm just going to, even though we're using it as an eraser, this is silly, I'm gonna hover it over here, and now we can actually paint out this bit of the patch. There we go, and I'm gonna still scrub through and make sure, oh, looks like we actually painted out too much. I can see the stool there. So just this bit right here. And, okay, there we go. I guess I can see a little bit of the... Cool. Okay, so now we just have to put this shoe back in here. Here, let me go back into object mode. And the way we're going to do that is I just don't want to see any of this patch. So if I create a cube here, and here, I think we have a couple points from the stool. Let's see. Yeah, here's some of the stuff from the stool here. This is probably his shoe or something like it. I'm going to line this up here. Yeah. And if I give this a new material and make that a holdout, it will render as alpha 0, which means it's totally transparent and you just see the background video. So here I've got a shoe type shape going on. Control B to bevel it a little and line this up like this. And there we go. All right, we've got our shoe back on top of the patch. It probably won't line up perfectly, so I'm going to turn on auto keying, and here, give it a little keyframe here, and just slide through to the beginning and the end, and make sure that this mostly lines up with where the shoe is actually at. Actually, we did pretty good. This lines up all right. Yeah. Okay, so if we want to composite this, right now I have this background video in here, but in real life what we're looking at is, here, let me turn this off, is this. And so we want to put this patch on top of the original footage. So to do that, we just hit F12 to render it out and hop into the compositor. Use nodes for the compositor. You can see our patch is already here. Let's hit Shift A, input a movie clip, which will be, yeah, that'll be Oh no, this is just one texture. Here, let's I've never tried importing an image sequence here, but let's see if it works the exact same. If I just select that, is that going to be... Yes, okay, good, that is animated. So now we just put this on top of this very easily with a color alpha over. And I think it puts down this image first, then it puts the bottom one on top, which is a little bit weird, but let's see how that goes. To see what we're doing, we check backdrop, and I'm going to hold down Control-Shift-Click on that node to preview it. And it is not lining up because we got to re-render this patch here, and then it should all... Boop! Look at that! Okay, it works. It works great. So I'm going to set up my output settings here. Just save this somewhere. Final render. Pow, pow, pow. Gonna save as a JPEG, because why not? And if I go Control F12, it should just output it. So what is this useful for? This type of stuff is it's very, very common in VFX where they'll have something, hanging from a C-stand, or they have some sort of rig in the scene. I mean, all the time there's a little bit of a light stand or a sandbag left in there, and you have to paint it out, but because of the perspective, you have to actually recreate the environment. And so being able to quickly bash out something like this, usually it's not even so obvious. Again, it's just some object or can or something in the back, and you've got to get rid of it, but you have to still match the perspective of the original background. So that's used all the time. In a more fun way, imagine like somebody getting into a spaceship or something, and you want them walking on a ladder or whatever. So you can have them just jumping onto like a box and then crawling into a cockpit, but then you can paint out the original stuff that they're crawling onto and replace it with whatever you want. So it's a great way to get more interaction between live action and CG. Honestly, it's fun seeing that it can work this easily. In fact, here, look at this. If we wanted, we could set up like a little UV sphere underneath this boot. Here, we'll parent it to his shoe. And look at that. It looks like he's floating around on a little UFO. That's pretty cool. But yeah, let's take a look at the final. Okay, this looks pretty good. I probably could have made this model, match a little bit closer. But you could also do this, in post with masking. I did the tutorial a little bit ago for the postcard replacement, talking a little bit about masking, and you could just really easily track a point on the shoe and make a mask that followed that in like 2 seconds. In fact, that probably would have been a better way to do it. I just like seeing how seeing everything happen in the viewport. And look at this, I can't even tell where the patch is. This worked out really well. I'm going to be doing this a lot. On a final note, I sometimes hate that these videos are like 30 minutes long, because if you were doing this as quickly as possible, you could probably do it in like 7-8 minutes. It's just the process of talking through it all makes the timeline long, and so people think that it has to be, a time-intensive effect. But I think you could actually do this really quick if you wanted. Anyways, yes, talk soon.